Hello, today is Wednesday, May 22nd, and welcome to episode 339 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI's Deputy Executive Director, Jessica Jones, and I'm joined today by NSI's founder and Executive Director, Jamil Jaffer, and
I am here.
two senior fellows, Les Munson and Morgan Vina, with a special guest appearance by Dylan Vina, who is spotting a heavy fever. Okay, so what are we talking about today? We are talking about New Caledonia, which, I'm sorry to be an ignorant American, is not a made-up name from Princess Diaries. It's a real place. It is a French territory made up of about a dozen islands in the South Pacific. For those of you that aren't good with geography, like myself, it's about 1,000 miles east of Australia. It's home to less than 300,000 people, 41% of whom are native Kanaks and about 25% of European origin. It was annexed by France in 1853, and it became a territory in 1946, and it's been going through conflicts and grievances since then. But for about a week now, violence has paralyzed the islands after lawmakers in Paris approved a constitutional amendment that would allow recent arrivals to the territory to vote in provincial elections. This has angered many because in 1998, an accord was made that helped end conflict at that time that restricted voting to the Kanaks and migrants living in New Caledonia before 1998 and their children. So this constitutional amendment would expand voting, of course, and locals are worried it would dilute the vote of the indigenous. At least 6 people have died in the protests. It's shut down the international airport, schools. There's a curfew in the capital city. If you see photos, I mean, you can see the devastation throughout the island. And French President Emmanuel Macron flew out last night to the territory. On top of this, another reason why we're talking about the country, it's not just protest against, one of our longtime allies. New Caledonia is also the world's number 3 nickel producer, which makes it a focal point for France's push to secure raw materials in its clean energy transition, competition against China. It's strategically placed, of course, in the South Pacific. So in addition to fighting this constitutional amendment about voting, pro-independence parties on the island are also fighting a French proposal that would lift restrictions on exporting unprocessed nickel, which of course makes locals mad because there's nickel processing plants on the island that would not have to be used. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff going on here. So I'll start with, French lawmakers say that this move was to spread democracy, right? The current voting arrangement is undemocratic. Jamil's already laughing. So Jamil, I'll turn to you first. Do we buy kind of the genuine democratic reasons of French lawmakers? Or, there's folks on the islands who are like, hey, new colonialism, exploitation of resources. What's going on?
Well, I mean, they are expanding democracy and that they're expanding the voter base, but they're expanding the voter base to exactly the people that the New Caledonians, the Kanaks, don't want it expanded to, which are these new French citizens who've come to the island recently. Now, to be fair to the French, they're only expanding to people who've been there for 10 years, so they've sort of established a presence on New Caledonia. Clearly plan to stay there for a while. But it is a problem because the way the French parliament does this is, by the way, governed by the French constitution, the Noumea Accords, which is accords between New Caledonia and the French as part of their territorial agreements. And the way this works, the French parliament proposes a constitutional amendment, or the French president can, if the prime minister recommends it. But they propose a constitutional amendment. If the Senate and the Assembly vote for it by simple majorities, the National Assembly and the Senate in France, then sitting together as Congress, by a 3/5 majority, if they pass it, it's in place, no consultation needed, although consultations are recommended. And that's actually the process they use. So this is an all French, back at home in Paris solution, not a New Caledonian solution. Now, to be fair, again, to the French, they did try to engage the New Caledonians. They tried to engage the political parties. The political parties not wanting this change, boycotted the conversations. And for 2 years, this has been going on. So nobody should be surprised this was going to happen. But I think what the really key to this whole story, Jess, is less about what exactly has happened in New Caledonia and the political parties there, but who's really running the show, because it's the Chinese, the Russians, and bizarrely Azerbaijan, which we'll come back to in a second, who are trying to influence this effort against the French government. So there are legit grievances. The French are also trying to do something they see as legit, and it's all this whole fire is being stoked by the Chinese and the Russians and the Azerbaijanis, who have different equities in play here.
Yeah, Morgan, I'd like, you to talk a little bit more about that, China and influence, the islands itself are important to France because of their positioning in the South Pacific. And right now you've got Macron sending in forces heavy-handed trying to, tamper down violence, which may backfire, right? So what does this mean for, France's security plans? What does it mean for competition with China?
Sure. So, I mean, for years, China's tried to increase for years, China has tried to increase its footprint in the archipelago by investing in the nickel industry. This is not a surprise here. China's been increasing its footprint and its malign influence in the Indo-Pacific and specifically the South Pacific for a long time. And we saw what's been going on with the Solomon Islands not too long ago. We had a podcast on that. So, I mean, I definitely think that there is a sense amongst the independence activists and leaders that the Chinese are not necessarily a significant threat as opposed to France, their colonial power, right? On the contrary, I think there is this naive sentiment that China can potentially be a new partner here, but also one that comes with debt trap diplomacy.
Les, I know you like any episode where you can say Zoodalores. That's just your favorite. So you're welcome for picking New Caledonia today. What do you make of what's going on here in the South Pacific?
Well, I think it is a lesson for France, which is a little bit delusional or delirant about its role in the world. You've got, by the way, President Macron is
Was that
evidently...
actually the French word for delusional, or you just make that up?
Yeah, I looked it up. I took a lot of French in high school. I didn't do well, but I do know how to look up words on my phone. Delirant. And Macron is on his way to New Caledonia with the French defense minister and interior minister. This is a lesson about France not really being able to take care of its own portfolio of issues in the world. So when Emmanuel Macron comes out and says, oh, we should all send troops into Ukraine, or the European countries need to have their own independent defense efforts separate from the United States, we should take that with a grain of salt. France was a terrible colonial power. We're suffering the consequences of that in the Sahel in particular, also here in the Indo-Pacific. Another thing for folks to focus on, I think, is the strategic mineral aspect of this. It is interesting how political chaos follows the availability of strategic minerals in the developing world. There was a big issue in Panama about a year ago over a copper mine there that created a lot of political turmoil. We have this issue in New Caledonia. It is a ripe opportunity for our adversaries to cause trouble, particularly in smaller polities. So the U.S. and its allies need to be smarter about this, need to be work in concert more, and we should not allow the French to think that they can make decisions on their own ever, really, under any circumstances.
Wow, I'm glad you took French, Les. You have this nuanced take on it. Don't listen ever. With that, that's a wrap. Thanks so much to Devlin, Bernie, Claude Jennings, and the NSI team for their help in producing today's episode. Join us again on Friday, maybe a fun Friday, May 24th, for another episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart fast on the national security and foreign policy debate shaking up America. Or on YouTube, check out Dylan Vigna there. And if you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.